my name is Amaya and today my presentation is going to be about reading comprehension and the impacts that different types of music have on it. So I just want you to take this scenario for example. There are 3 high school students that are sitting down to take the same reading exam. However, they're in different environments. One student is in a classroom where lyrical music is playing in the background. The other student is in a classroom with music, however, it's instrumental. And finally, there's a third student in a classroom that is completely silent. I want you to think about who will perform better and keep that answer in your head. We'll come to it after the presentation. So in my personal experience, my AP Lit teacher loves to play background music. Personally, I don't read or study with background music. I don't think it's helpful to me. And it was clear that in my test that we took, she was playing a Disney instrumental soundtrack, and I found myself during the test to be singing along or humming the words of the song instead of reading the passage at hand. That resulted in me getting a 30%. Obviously, there are probably some other factors that might have played a role in this grade, but when she allowed me to retake the exam in a completely silent environment, my grade went from a 30 to a 71.4. So I realized that I work better in a silent condition or in areas that are silent. However, it's clear that I'm in the minority for this. Every year, students sit down to study or take different exams that have the potential to shape their entire high school trajectory. However, many individuals have began to adopt different methods of study for their ideal environment, and I've realized that has come to implement music. For example, a study from Colorado State University in 2022 found that half of Americans that are outside of high school recalled using music to listen and study using music to listen to while studying and testing in class. It also showed that Gen Z, which ranges from the years 1997 to 2012, were the most likely generation to use music as a buffer for helping them study. That being said, F.H. Rocher, who was a neurobiology scientist in 1993, stated that instrumental or classical music boosts alertness and enhances brain activity, improving object manipulation and cognitive performance. But it's safe to assume that when a student clicks on their playlist to study or read a passage, they're not clicking on an instrumental or classical playlist. They're gonna click on one that has catchy lyrics and a upbeat tempo. That being said, it made me I started to think, why do we choose the music that we do as our buffer for when we're studying or when we're reading? And according to the British Journal of Educational Psychology in 2000, in teenagers, music is highly significant because it serves as an emotional means of expression as well as a way to connect socially and represent themselves. That being said, when you're choosing your music, you're choosing music that is meaningful to you. It usually has a deeper meaning. It's something that you really love and you really enjoy. And it really made me question, how much are we actually comprehending and understanding when we put this music on? Because clearly in my case, when they were playing the Disney music, I wasn't able to focus. And I feel like that might be true to other students around. This led me to my research question. How does the presence of music, instrumental versus lyrical, affect reading comprehension compared to a silent environment in high school students specifically? This question was also written with consideration to 2 other factors. The first factor was an individual's music preference, meaning what music genres do they tend to listen to. That includes pop, lyrical, things like that, as well as their self-reported confidence in their reading abilities. So leading to my literature review, a study by the National Center for Biotechnology Information in 2022 looked at the impacts that both lyrical music and instrumental music have on cognitive tasks. The lyrical music was found to negatively impact cognitive performance because according to the science, the lyrics that are coming from the music are constantly competing for your mental resources that are used with understanding and focusing. On the flip side, instrumental music had a positive impact on cognitive tasks because it helped enhance your focus and your attention. However, it's important to mention that this study never focused specifically on a singular cognitive task. The way that I had designed my study is to emphasize reading comprehension as the primary cognitive task instead of focusing on a broader range of tasks. In a similar study, Psychologists were testing whether your confidence impacts your performance on different tasks. It was found that more self-confidence means a better performance. However, the gap here is that it wasn't focused specifically on reading. In fact, it was just looking at, like the last one, it's just looking at tasks in general. It was just saying that when you have an optimal level of confidence, you tend to perform better, but it never tested a specific task. And finally, a final text stated that students demonstrate better performance when listening to their preferred music choice. However, the biggest gap here is that this study was done on middle schoolers and college students. And like I stated in the beginning, music has a significant meaning to teenagers, meanings that differ from a middle schooler and a college student. So I wanted to look into how our music that we are attracted to, how that impacts us mostly. Because when you look at it, middle school students and college students have different levels of cognitive ability, have different types of music that they are attracted to, and that should impact the way we comprehend certain texts. So that leads me to my hypothesis, which I broke into two parts. First, I believe that lyrical music will have the most negative impact on reading comprehension. Second, I stated that participants that did not prefer a certain genre or that have self-reported lower self-confidence in their reading abilities will also have a lower performance compared to other students. So now for my methodology. I decided to do an experiment clearly, but the type of experiment I decided to use was a within subjects experiment. This is classified as a design that allows all participants to be exposed to every single independent variable. The reason why this was important to me is because if all participants were exposed to all variables, it eliminates any possible bias that may have occurred if only a certain group of students sat in a specific independent variable. So for my variables, I chose 3 different testing conditions. The first condition is considered the silent condition, which I considered the control group. This is going to be the basis for all my information. Then second, I had the instrumental music condition and the lyrical music condition. Once again, all participants will experience all 3 conditions. For the experimental process, I picked out 3 different standardized texts that were found in PSATs that were taken across the country. For the reading passage, they will have 10 minutes to read. They were allowed to annotate, do whatever they wanted to the passage. After that, a comprehension test followed. They had 15 minutes for this comprehension test. It's important to mention that the questions here were not outside thinking. The questions, the answers were found within the text. So they just had to go back to the text to find this. Then I allowed them a 5-minute break period. This break period was to ensure that whatever issues that they had in the first reading pass period and comprehension test period, they were able to let that go and refresh and move on to the next process. We were then repeating the process 2 more times for the other 2 conditions. As for participants, I chose 10 high school students ranging from grades 9 through 12. They were randomly selected from a database to ensure that I eliminated any possible bias, that I wasn't choosing people that I knew, that I wasn't choosing my friends. And then in order to get all important information, including gender, age, race, I had them complete a pre-survey that gave me all the basic demographic information. As for the songs that I chose 15 different lyrical choices as well as 15 different instrumental choices. Some of the lyrical choices included Coldplay Fix You, J. Cole Love Yours, and Ed Sheeran Shape of You. The instrumental choices included artists like Mozart and Beethoven. And the reason why I chose these choices is because I wanted to make sure all genres were encapsulated when I was choosing music. It ranges from hip hop to lyrical to contemporary music, and I wanted to make sure that every student got a piece of what their favorite genre that was represented in the study. As for ethical considerations, the first step was getting my experiment approved by the IRB Ethics Board to make sure that none of my participants were being harmed in the course of the study. Next, all participant information remained anonymous and confidential. I was only able to recognize a participant and connect their information through their school ID number. And then finally, I made sure that I received parental consent as well as student consent to make sure that both parties were okay with being involved in the experiment. As for analyzing data, I wanted to use a paired t-test. A paired t-test is a statistical test that compares two sets of data from the same participants. Because all participants will experience all three different conditions, their performances can be directly compared. So I created three different comparisons. The first comparison was silent versus instrumental, the second was silent versus lyrical, and the third was instrumental versus lyrical. A big part of a paired t-test is a t-statistic and a critical value, which I'll go more in depth as we go further on in the presentation. However, it's important to mention that I was looking at whether this information was statistically significant. This means that if your data was statistically significant, it's unlikely that the relationship that I observed in the study was due to chance. If it's statistically significant, it means that there is a real and true connection between these two variables. If not, your data is not statistically significant. That is found if your t-statistic is greater than your critical value. So going into my results, in the pre-survey, I added a question that asks about preferred music types. According to the results, 5 participants said that they prefer pop music. 1 participant said that they preferred hip hop and rap. 1 participant said that they preferred rock music. And surprisingly, 2 participants said that they enjoyed classical music. However, 1 participant did fill out the other category, and they said that their preferred genre of music is soundtrack, which includes like Broadway and different musicals like that. I also asked a question, the survey also asked participants how they would rank their self-confidence on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 having a low self-confidence in their reading abilities and 5 being the highest. Based on the results, 1 participant ranked themselves at a 1, 1 participant ranked themselves at a 2, 4 participants ranked themselves at a 3, 3 participants ranked themselves at a 4, and 1 participant ranked themselves at a 5. So here on the screen are the raw comprehension scores. I made them out of 10 for simplicity, and obviously this is a lot of information, and there was a lot that I had to do with that. So I decided to condense it into 3 different categories. First, I found the mean difference and the standard deviation. The mean difference is classified as the average calculated difference between two different groups. And these 2 stats help me find my t-statistics, which are outlined here. For silent versus instrumental, it was 2.89. For silent versus lyrical, it was 8.07. And for instrumental versus lyrical, my t-statistic was 4.07. In addition, I also utilized a t-chart. A t-chart is a widely used statistic-based quality that helps you find your critical value. So my level of significance was 0.05, and my degrees of freedom was 9, which is found from the number of participants minus 1. And just to show proof, here is a t-chart that shows that the value here for your critical value should be 2.262 after you do the math. Based on that, I went into finding what the relationship between 2 different comparisons meant. For, like I said before, silent versus instrumental music had a t-statistic of 2.89. That means that my t-statistic was greater than my critical value, which was 2.26, and I would reject my null hypothesis, which reads that there's no significant difference in the comprehension scores between the silent and instrumental music conditions. This means that the data found was statistically significant, meaning that there is an important divide between silent and instrumental music. The same was said for silent versus lyrical music, where the t-statistic was 8.07, which was significantly greater than my critical value of 2.262. Once again, I rejected my null hypothesis, and I found that there was a statistically significant difference between comprehension scores in these 2 categories. Finally, for instrumental and lyrical music, my t-statistic was 4.07. That, once again, is greater than my critical value of 2.262, meaning that I will reject my null hypothesis, and I found that there was a statistical significance between these 2 different comparisons. When it comes to the factors that I mentioned earlier, self-confidence as well as your preferred music type, I realized that personal preference did have an impact. However, it was not statistically significant. Students performed relatively the same over all the course of like the different genres of music. However, when it comes to self-reported scores, students that stated that they had a higher confidence, so like 4 to 5, did have a better performance than students that ranked themselves lower. So based on this information, the first part of my hypothesis was correct. Lyrical music did have the most negative impact on reading comprehension. However, the second part was 50-50. While students that did rank themselves with lower self-confidence had a lower performance, that was not necessarily true based on the different genres that I included in the experiment. So based on this information, I wanted to see how this would be best implemented in schools. One, I wanted to adjust the learning environment. We should be encouraging students to continue working in silent environments because it helps enhance and foster better focus and understanding. However, it is important to understand that not every student is going to fall in this category, and that sometimes tailored approaches based on student preferences might be needed. Students may have different experience due to personal factors, and it's important to remember this and cater to every group that you can. And finally, I said additional research and testing. As new generations come into school, into high school, they're not all going to have the same data regarding the study. So it's important to conduct follow-up experiments and see if the same results hold over time. So revisiting that introduction and that scenario that I had, when it comes to the 3 students preparing for the same reading exam, the student that is taking the exam in complete silence will perform better than the students in the other 2 environments based on my data. And this is why we're excited, and thank you.
Okay, Amaya, what was one obstacle or challenge you encountered while implementing your research method? And how did you address it?
One of the biggest challenges I encountered was that it was really hard to randomly select people. So in order to do that, I had used a database and I had emailed students saying that I had chosen them for a study and I wanted them to participate in, and half of them didn't respond the first time. And I was on a time constraint, so I had to do it again, and no one responded the second time. So it got to the point where I had to ask my friends and my family to post it on their Instagram and have the link on their Instagram so that they can respond there, and that's how I got my participants. It's also why my number of participants are really tiny at 10, and if I had, if people responded, I would have had like more people, and that was the plan, but it didn't happen, so I had to adjust.
How might your conclusions, findings, products relate to the current body of work in the community or field?
So based on my literature review, it's clear that although we had information on how instrumental music, lyrical music, and silent conditions help with cognitive tasks, their focus was never on high school students specifically and reading comprehension specifically. And I feel like that is one of the biggest areas of our high school career, is reading comprehension and understanding different things and learning how that impacts us. And so with such a major trend that I was seeing and realizing that I was in the minority of enjoying silence while doing work and reading, I realized that I should look at the connection between the 2 of those to see how we can implement it into schools and at home for students to understand what would have their best interests at.
Think about the initial curiosity that led to your inquiry. What other areas of inquiry might the same curiosity lead to?
My initial area of inquiry came from that test score that I got, that was a 30, because I was really like, wow, I don't usually score those, so was it me? But also that can deviate from like the music sector, because there was a lot going on in that classroom environment when we were testing. So just looking at what like the different factors that play into like a student's understanding and a student's focus and what they best need to strive in a certain environment. And so that could be taking away music completely and just looking at, the amount of people that were in the classroom, or whether the different testing environments played a role. So, yeah.
Any other